Mingles.
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 Mingles. Mingles. Mingles.
Mingles.
Mingles.
Today is a special day. Presenting, in collaboration with After Later Audio, the very first ever Robots Are Red module. Mingles, the 12 HP dual 3-channel mixer with independent panning for each of the two channels. Each of the two channels has a built-in VCA and a left-right stereo output. We also get a mix output of both sides of Mingles. And you'll notice there's an LFO here. The LFO is applied internally to each of the two channels, and the LFO on the second panning is actually inverted, so it goes the opposite direction of the first one, so you could get more crisscross panning effects. You could set the amount of panning from that LFO, or send CV into it with this as an attenuator. There's a VCA input, LFO rate input to push your LFO to further levels or to just control it and move it around. There's an LFO output. Then we have channel 2 VCA, the channel 2 pan. We have inputs 1, 2, and 3, and then inputs 4, 5, and 6 for channel 2, and then all our stereo outputs. Now the LFO is a triangle wave, but on the back of the module, you could actually move a jumper and turn it into a pulse wave, which is what I have on the second Mingles right here. Then also on the back of Mingles, there are these pins, which you can connect the output to the input of another Mingles, or a cast iron, or any other module in the VIP mixer series from After Later Audio. It will cascade your audio down through that main master mix. So you could essentially daisy chain as many Mingles as you want, or just use one, because it's a nice compact 6-input 2-channel mixer. So this is great if you want a smaller rack and you don't want dedicated VCAs. You have those VCAs in there in the mixer. So it's just overall a great utility, but then it's also a great panning effect. And that is Mingles in a nutshell. Now let's grab some headphones and jump to some patches. Okay, right now I have two oscillators coming from this Buchla dual oscillator. One goes into input 1 on channel 1. The other goes into input 4 on channel 2. And when I turn up the volumes, you can hear the oscillators. Now we have that panning control over each of the two channels. And we can automate that. And then, since we have kind of a stereo oscillator signal going in here, I'm going to pan channel 1 hard left and channel 2 hard right. Actually, that's a little too much for this, so I'm going to go halfway. Now I also have this plugged into Razor, the Blades module from the MIC line, and I'm going to plug some triggers into Carve here, and then plug those into the VCA input of each of the two channels. And now we have a cool stereo full voice oscillator. And then we can, of course, play with our panning and our panning amount. And let me just stop our sequence for a second and pull out these VCAs. And you can hear the LFO goes from about a 5-second cycle to just audio rates. And then with CV, we can push it further. So I have 10 volts packed up here on the 4th channel of Carve, and I'm just going to increase the voltage onto the LFO rate. So we can get pretty far into the audio range. And on the other side, we can go real slow. But back to our VCA patch here. Now I'm going to molt my envelopes and apply those to the filter. And now we have a nice full stereo patch here. Now let's add some effects. Now let's quickly modulate the LFO rate. I'm going to start this with the LFO amount all the way down and gradually increase it. Signal here, aside from the delay. Let's see just how much width we lose in the patch. Now let's look at mixing some drums with Mingles. Some drums patched in to Mingles. The kick and snare are going into input 1 and input 4. And so we could hear the difference between the two channels. I'm going to pan them hard left and hard right. And I have the CV amount for the LFO all the way down right now. So you could hear I have the kick and snare on input 1, and then I have it molted with a stackable cable here into input 4. Basically, so we could give ourselves a mono signal of the kick and snare, so that's right in the middle. And then on input 2, I have the hi-hats. And then on input 4, I have the rest of the percussion. So this is obviously very hard pan and not the best for a mix. And this is what it sounds like in mono. We could obviously mix our levels here. I'm going to turn the hi-hats down a little bit. And I'm going to turn this percussion down, actually, not our hi-hats. And now when I add the CV amount, we get some moving panning with our hi-hats and with our percussion sounds, but our kick and snare stay right in the middle. Let's play with our LFO rate. Let's turn our panning. Let's actually turn the cymbals to the right and the percussion to the left. And let's crank the CV all the way up. And let's turn the LFO rate down. And now what if I took two related signals, like from dice here, and put each of those into each of the pan inputs? And I'm going to set it to plus and minus 5 volts. Increase our rate here. I'm going to switch over to the third output because that is more closely related to the second. Let's pan this a little harder. Now let's look at Mingles as an end-of-chain mixer and panner for an effect send or an effect signal. So basically post, delay, and reverb. Right now I have the stereo output of resonate or rings going into data bender and then going out into input 1 and input 4 of Mingles. And I have channel 1 panned hard left and channel 2 panned hard right. Here is our stereo signal without Mingles being applied. We can see just with the pattern of strumming here, the stereo is not the best because we're getting all the bass notes in one ear and all the higher notes in the other ear. And if you've noticed, I've switched over to this other Mingles here because on this one, I have the pulse wave applied to the LFO rate. So let's increase the CV amounts and see how it sounds with a more stereoized stereo. And since it's data bender, I gave it the pulse wave, so we have a more glitchy, harder panning. And that is Mingles as a stereoizer to even widen your already stereo signals as an end-of-chain patch. Now, some other good uses of Mingles is to use each of the two channels individually and use them as a 3-channel VCA for a synth patch, or to add some stereo to 2 different mono signals. And with the panner, instead of using them as left-right outputs, you can actually use them as sends to 2 different effects units, and then you could control it with CV, or you could fluctuate back and forth between the 2 effects. A panner is basically the opposite of a crossfader. And in whatever outputs you're using, if you have an additional input on a certain side, you can feedback patch that output back into one of the inputs. Now, here's a little jam I put together.